The weekend before Dawn of War 3 hit full release, Relic Entertainment gave us a crack at a multiplayer beta, and my mate Hamsy and I thought this sounds like a bit of us, so we dutifully downloaded the client and gave it the old college try. And I've got to say, it was a lot of fun. We had some initial success pairing Orcs and Space Marines, but after a while, Hamsy's army doctrine selections of Steinlager, Heineken, and falling asleep early started to take their toll. Despite a brief dalliance with the Space Marines, I mostly played Orcs because of fucking course I did. Orcs is best.
Orcs is the biggest and the strongest!
They're just so earnestly and cheerfully violent, like a mosh pit at a Weird Al Yankovic concert. They're the greatest, they really are. They're just so violently and brutally direct. It's just so characteristically Orky, which makes them the best because, as we've already established, Orcs is best. Say that pairing the Orcs with their favourite enemies, the Space Marines, as their allies, really works a treat. The Space Marines are appropriately tough kids who can hold a line like nobody's business, and their ability to deploy via drop pods mean you can effectively set up airdropped pillboxes anywhere on the map that you need to hold, providing the anvil for the hammer blow that is the Orc counter-offensive. And what a hammer blow it is. The Orcs can build up waves of attack troops so quickly and just throw them into the mix without a care in the world. They are aggressive and completely expendable in the early stages of the game because of a rebate on your investments for every unit killed. And your cheaper elites pack a hell of a lot of punch despite lacking durability, and synergize brilliantly well with the Orc ability to call down literal scrap meteors from the heavens. So our Orc and Marine pair-up was a lot more effective than our attempt with the Orcs and Eldar, and then with the problems of the 3-player mode. Which is unfortunate because in my opinion the 3v3 mode in this game does not work anywhere near as good as 2v2. During play I found it frustrating as the in-game economy seemed stretched entirely too thin. I did not have the resources to do anything. And despite the fact that it appeared that our unknown third man in each round had a firm handle on things, especially considering all the resource points he'd captured from me. The post-game results screens, however, showed that in every single case, they had been asleep at the wheel. But in spite of all that, as noted, it was a hell of a lot of fun. If you can't enjoy a game that you occasionally lose, you have no business playing multiplayer games. Which brings us neatly to the question, should you play this multiplayer game? As I said, people will have an interest in Dawn of War 3 for one of 3 reasons. 1. You are a fan of the 40k universe and want to play a game set in it. 2. You are a fan of real-time strategy games and want to play the newest, flashiest, shiniest one out there. Or 3. You are a fan of the established Dawn of War series and want more of the same. For the first point, Relic gets a general tick overall, although there are some minor quibbles. By and large, the units resemble their tabletop counterparts both in appearance and in performance, with some of the more deadly units of the 40k universe like Deathwatch kill teams and Terminators gated away as elite regiments, so they can retain that special army centre-place feel about them. And the 3 forces available have their broad strokes playstyle about right. Marines are efficient and reliable, Orcs are ramshackle, unpredictable and violent, and the Eldar are cunts. Tough to play, but loaded down with cheap exploits, if we're being diplomatic. And it will come as no surprise to anyone at all that once again Relic Entertainment have knocked it out of the park in regards to the voice acting in this game. The vocal characterization of the unit responses is utterly superb. The Marines exhibit the perfect blend of military professionalism and withering cultish arrogance, with the typical bombast of the cult imperialis. The Orcs once more are cheerful cockney sociopaths, and my favourite bit of dialogue in the game comes from the Orc Killer Can unit that cheerfully boasts that I'm a killer can, not a killer can't, and the Eldar are gits what need a good stomping. But the gameplay doesn't feel like the grim darkness of the 41st millennium where there was only war. The contrived structure of the games sticks out like a sore thumb. The process of eliminating field generator, turret, and power core, that has no real meaning in the game world. A point that is glaringly highlighted by the fact that each of these integral objects that you have to destroy in the multiplayer mode are identical across all three factions and aesthetically do not resemble anything in the 40k universe. They are simply, obviously, out-of-place contrivances tacked on purely for the convenience of the gameplay mechanics that they're building the multiplayer around. It is simply lazy and immediately kills the atmosphere of the game, for anyone whose key interest in Dawn of War is the setting. In all, it probably ekes out a B grade, purely on the strength of voice acting alone. Now on to Judgment Point 2, how the game holds up as an RTS. And I must preface this with the admission that I come at this as a fan of the RTS genre, not necessarily an expert. I have enjoyed real-time strategy as a genre from back in the days of Dune 2 and the original Command & Conquer, right the way through to the more recent Company of Heroes and especially the Total War series, and my god didn't they do a good job of Total War Warhammer, huh? But by and large I've been mostly a single-player, comp-stomp kind of guy, not really into the hyper-competitive StarCraft scene or anything like that, so I'm not the guy to go to when talking about high-end competitive play, metas, esports. That's just stuff that I have not got a firm grounding in. So it could well be that Relic wanted to structure the game in such a way to curate a good, top-end competitive esports scene for this game. More power to them, but that's not really my dog in this fight. So me, Armchair General, I find this game to be a touch shallow in regards to real-time strategy. I've only played the multiplayer and not against AI opponents. All I have is the person-v-person to draw on, but by all accounts the single-player experience of this game is woefully undercooked. The single-player campaign has been described by many people as an extended tutorial, which I guess is kind of a good thing in disguise considering the actual tutorials for this game are so bare-bones basic they basically teach you how to click your mouse. In the multiplayer, the play experience is a little thin. There is some base building, but there's little strategic depth to it. It's basically a chore that you have to do to get more units pumped out. And in terms of on-field scenery, the strategic benefits thereof, it is so incredibly paint-by-numbers black and white. Rather than existing in any sort of organic sense, they are all boiled down to primary locations. The only cover in the game are prefabricated defences, which are all located within a certain distance from the resource gathering points. The only scenery in the game that blocks line of sight are pre-designated patches of stealth ground that hides the units inside and nothing else. The only other terrain features in the game are walls or literal holes in the ground to funnel movement into corridors, and the only other strategic consideration is where do you place your buildings, because buildings are the only place where you can replenish units that have suffered casualties. That is all there is. There is no general soft or light cover, there's no patches of ground that slows down movement, there's no defensible buildings with higher elevated view, there's no high ground advantage, sorry Obi-Wan. And as Dawn of War 3 has removed both the morale system and fire arcs for heavy weapons, there is no practical advantage to positioning. The only time positioning is even remotely relevant is when the enemy is about to drop their big mega area of effect damage dealer on you. To be honest, I'm really not that impressed with the gameplay, especially after having recently played a lot of Total War Warhammer, where scenery, terrain, and your decision making in regards to it have an incredible impact on the game. With the way that casualties can only be replenished near your actual core building structures, the resource points and resource generation provided from them feel a lot less like key aspects of victory, and more as a sort of valve to slow the development of the game. You don't build an advantage with it because of population cap, and building a buffer of requisition does not allow you to keep your units in the fight longer the way that you could in previous Dawn of Wars. And the way it stockpiles doing nothing in the later stages of the game means that you don't really gain an advantage by attacking the enemy's resource points either. So it's harder and less fruitful to sustain an assault, while the enemy can defend and reinforce at the same time, which means that the game steadily devolves to a point where you wait for your opponent to overextend and suffer casualties taking pointless resources from you, then you counterattack, and deliver a hammer blow to one of their shield generators, turrets, etc. And instead of sustained action, it just comes to a point where you're simply setting up for your elite to drop the big, massive meteor of destruction on them, which feels good. Don't get me wrong, the pretty explosions and the thrill of going Super Saiyan cannot be denied, but there's just no depth to it. When it's all pop and no substance, it gets old quick. Like, I could parallel with Doom 2016, Bethesda got it absolutely right. The glory kill function is an integral part of the gunfight. It looks nice and it's a pop, but it generates resources and it's built onto a structure of incredibly good responsive gunplay, whereas the Dawn of 3 Super Saiyan summons is just a hollow high. And this all sounds pretty damning from me. So I'll soften the blow by restating that I did have a lot of fun playing this game, and as we know, Dawn of War games, the series runs long, they develop a lot over time, so at some point they may release the game I want rather than just one that I sort of like, but as it stands, the single player doesn't warrant it, so unless I have friends that are willing to play it, then there's really not much point to owning it. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to C grade it. And sure, C's make degrees, but if you're a C student, then the best part of uni is clearly the social aspect. And finally, my thoughts on Dawn of War 3 as a fan of the Dawn of War series itself. It wouldn't exactly be controversial to say that the Dawn of War series has been well received by the 40k community and has left a lasting impact on the game. The introduction of the Bloodraven chapter of Space Marines to the 40k canon has been the surest sign of the success of the franchise. The narrative of the first game has been incorporated into the broader 40k setting, and that history has been developed and added to in the sequel. And in terms of the gameplay and the quality of games released under this title, Dawn of War 1 and 2 have both been industry standouts in their own ways. Dawn of War 1 took the feel of the standard Command & Conquer style game and brought it down to a slightly more intimate scale, and added in a great deal more complexity with troop morale and positioning, troop characterization, and visceral visual carnage in the game. Retaining the strategic depth of base building and build queues, but adding in a further, more aggressive playstyle in the acquisition of resources by making them strategic locations on the battlefield to be held, rather than simple resources to be farmed. And Dawn of War 2, although radically different, was just as excellent, for the most part leaving the Command & Conquer playstyle behind, abandoning base building almost entirely, in favour of a more mobile and mission-oriented gameplay, bridging the gap between Company of Heroes and Dynasty Warriors in a way that was controversial to quite a few, but enjoyed by very many as well, myself included. Both of these titles were primarily single-player focused with excellent campaigns, but with the addition of very strong multiplayer options available, with Dawn of War 2's Last Stand mode becoming particularly popular. But this is where Dawn of War 3 has stepped aside the most dramatically. It is a multiplayer focused game, with the single-player campaign added in almost as an afterthought. The whole focus is on the multiplayer scene, with a element of grinding added with the unlocks of elites and options for them. The gameplay is a halfway point between Dawn of War 1 and Dawn of War 2, but lacking the best points of either. And rather than following a satisfying narrative campaign, the single-player campaign forces you to hop between factions in missions that have been described as insufferably boring. The biggest and most crippling criticism that I can make of this game is that whereas Dawn of War 1 and 2 were industry leaders that were forging their own identity and advancing gameplay concepts not used elsewhere, unfortunately Dawn of War 3 seems to be a follower chasing after the esports domain, and not even doing a particularly good job of that. It has been described as MOBA light, and despite the fact that that's not entirely accurate, it is at least close enough that you can see the resemblance. So there's elements of Dawn of War carried through just through sheer history alone, but it's not really got the same shine that the rest of the series had. It's a C- on the strength of nostalgia alone, purely because the old characters from the first two games all come back, and they are, by now, old friends of mine. So, upon reflection, my full review of Dawn of War 3 is that it is an incomplete and unfortunately shallow experience at present. It's a fun game, but is not the one that I would have made. It's a fun time if your friends are playing it, but it's a waste of time if you're doing it alone. There's a few things that could get me to buy the game. Firstly, if a whole bunch of my friends are playing it, then I am definitely down. Secondly, if they drop the price dramatically, because as it stands, it does not deserve a full release AAA price. There just isn't enough content here, which dovetails into the third point. I would buy it if they added in all the content that should be here, and my impossible dream that would have me selling a kidney in order to afford this game was if they decided to load it up with an Imperial Guard release, focusing on the Battle of Armageddon as a fully fledged multi-path narrative campaign that fleshed out the conflict between Commissar Yarrick and Warlord Ghazghkull Thraka. I would hit that shit harder than punks hit Nazis. So, friends, let me know if you're keen on a decent multiplayer experience with the window dressing of the 40k universe tacked on. Perhaps, if I can reach a critical mass of at least 3 mates that are into it, I might be persuaded to part with my money, which is saying a lot of a man with Scottish heritage.